Good morning, it's Monday the 2nd of October in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, the Chancellor prepares to offer a wage boost to the lowest paid as his party colleagues call for tax cuts.
And I'm Caroline Hepker on location at the Conservative conference in Manchester, where the party is outlining its pitch to voters. But is anyone listening?
And elsewhere in the news, a stream of cash. New investment plans mean water bills in England will rise by 35% by the end of the decade. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. The UK Chancellor is to use his speech at the Conservative Party conference to announce plans to raise wages for the country's lowest paid workers. Jeremy Hunt will today say he's increasing the national living wage by around 6% to at least £11 an hour. The increase comes amid growing discontent within the Conservatives over Britain's record tax burden. But the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak told the BBC that changing that isn't his top priority.
I'm a Conservative. Of course I want to cut taxes. The best tax cut that I can deliver for the British people right now is to halve inflation. Inflation is a tax. It's a tax that impacts the poorest people the most.
Consumer price inflation currently stands at 6.7% in the UK. Rishi Sunak has pledged to get it below 5% by the end of the year. But not everyone is entirely on side with that view on taxes. The Secretary of State for Levelling Up, Michael Gove, says he wants to see cuts soon. Here's what he had to say when pushed on the issue.
The discussion about where the tax burden should fall, I think, is one that we need to take not now, but in a little bit's time.
Should there be a reduction in the tax burden on individuals before the next election? Are we talking the next year? Are we talking 3 years? Are we talking 5 years?
Yes, no, I would like to see the tax burden reduced before the next election.
Those comments from Michael Gove come as the Prime Minister's predecessor, Liz Truss, also gets set to make an intervention on the issue. Later today, she's expected to call for cuts to corporation tax, something she's previously targeted during the ill-fated mini-budget. In the United States, the government has avoided a shutdown. A stopgap spending bill passed by Congress over the weekend will keep government open until the 17th of November, but it doesn't include more funding for Ukraine. President Biden's budget director, Shalanda Young, says she's sure it will be passed later.
Those votes are there. We know there's a willing coalition, and I certainly expect members and the Speaker to keep their commitment, not to us, but the Ukrainian people we told we would be there.
That's Shalanda Young. The deal also gives financial markets some breathing room. Some analysts had warned that an extended closure of federal agencies would spur fresh gyrations in the Treasury curve and hit stocks that rely on government spending. Household water bills in the UK are set to rise by an average of 35% by 2030. That's as water companies plan to ramp up investment to £96 billion in the 5 years to 2030 for a series of projects, including new reservoirs and fixing leaks. Industry body Water UK says the investment programme would double current levels and will be the largest ever in the sector. The CEO of Microsoft will testify today in a major case against one of the tech giant's biggest rivals. The US government is seeking to prove that Google engaged in anti-competitive tactics to maintain its market dominance. More from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The DOJ has accused Google of paying $10 billion a year to rivals, as well as smartphone manufacturers and wireless carriers, to make Google Search the default option. Prosecutors hope to use the testimony of Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella to show how his company couldn't unlock Google's hold on the search market. Last week, a Microsoft executive said the company failed to secure a deal to put its Bing search app on Apple's products, even though Microsoft was willing to offer far better terms. Nadella was personally involved and spoke with Google CEO Sundar Pichai. Nadella will probably be asked about those conversations. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
New research suggests that almost 3/4 of British businesses have reduced the amount they spend on offices. A survey of more than 500 bosses by the real estate firm IWG also found that only 1 in 5 UK companies have not reconfigured their working space to suit hybrid working. High-rise financial districts have been hit by the turmoil sweeping office markets around the world. And with interest rates soaring and valuations plunging, the pain is set to intensify for many. According to Bloomberg's latest Markets Live Pulse survey, office prices in the US are due for a crash, and the commercial real estate market faces at least another 9 months of declines. And the billionaire Bill Ackman is said to be interested in pursuing a deal with Elon Musk's X Corporation as part of a new investment vehicle. Ackman's investment fund, Pershing Square, has regulatory approval for a new vehicle that targets private companies seeking to raise $1.5 billion or more. Ackman told the Wall Street Journal that X is absolutely one of the options that he's considering. So those are our top stories this morning. The focus this week, though, politics in the UK, with the Conservative Party's annual gathering underway in Manchester. Rishi Sunak's first conference as Prime Minister, and perhaps his last before the next UK general election, at a time when the Tories are trailing Labour on average by 18 points in the opinion polls. Caroline Hepker is at the Tory Party conference for us this morning. Caroline, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, this is, of course, a big test for Rishi Sunak. Our opinion columnist Adrian Wooldridge reporting this morning that we'll get the real Rishi at conference. What should we be expecting?
Well, I think if last year in Birmingham felt chaotic under the short-lived Liz Truss administration, this year feels really fraught. Rishi Sunak is hoping to unite his party, get them ready to fight the general election, perhaps in October next year. But amid a very difficult economic backdrop, Sunak has shifted gear. He's sounding a bit more combative. He's talked about being the change candidate despite 13 years of Conservative rule. But ill discipline, Stephen, really does seem to be creeping in. MPs, even ministers, pursuing their own agendas. Yesterday was dominated by a battle, a discussion, it would seem, over who potentially would replace Rishi Sunak if he loses the next general election. I'm thinking Home Secretary Suella Braverman, Business and Trade Secretary Kemi Badenoch. And then also, of course, the maths looks very daunting, given that Labour has largely enjoyed a double-digit lead over the Conservatives for some time now. So it's about picking policies, trying to unite MPs and Conservative activists who are all here in Manchester so that they have impact within the next year to convince voters to give the party another go.
Caroline, on policies then, I mean, how easy will it be to create unity around these issues? What are the key issues that we need to be watching out for the discussions over?
Look, I think today is going to be all about Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and his speech. I think the pledge to raise wages for the lowest paid workers, i.e. to raise the minimum wage, is going to be a big one today, up from £10.42 to £11. That's the expectation. But also returning to some Conservative rhetoric, cracking down on welfare claimants. The government does want to boost the number of people working by 1 million. So I think taxes and benefits are going to be front and centre. Hunt has said in the past that it would be virtually impossible to cut taxes until the UK economy improves. And yesterday, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, talked a lot about inflation being the main goal, bringing inflation down, that in and of itself is effectively a tax on people. And yet at the same time, you have very vocal MPs, including Liz Truss, the former Prime Minister, who is also here in Manchester. She's going to be speaking at the Growth Rally event alongside other former ministers. That's at 12:30 today. She is pushing for tax cuts ahead of the next general election, and that is a big focus for MPs and for Conservatives, who are worried that with the highest tax level since World War II, the Conservatives, are going to lose votes on that issue alone.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost seeing Conservatives returning to type, that we have the focus again back on tax cuts. So lots of interesting moves behind the scenes. We heard from Michael Gove there a few moments ago, and as you say, Liz Truss, someone that we're looking forward to hearing from later as well. What's the atmosphere, though, like at this conference? Caroline, it feels like a world apart compared to where we were a year ago.
Yeah, look, we're here at 6 a.m. I can't say that the hall is full yet, but we were here yesterday.
Surely not,
around.
Caroline. Everyone's not up early to get their first coffee in.
Well, there are quite a few TV crews around us. So, yes, there are journalists here, but others are not here. We were milling around yesterday. We did certainly bump into some ministers. I think that there is not much excitement. That is mainly what I took away. I think that the feeling is a little bit cagey. 46 or 47 Tory MPs are not going to be here. And again, quite bizarrely, the focus yesterday on perhaps who would take over if the Conservatives did not win. It seemed to be a lot of positioning, certainly, for that. that, even if it wasn't said outrightly. So I think it's a very difficult moment. Having said that, the economy is brightening. There is some good news for the Prime Minister in the sense that we've had better GDP growth in the second quarter, falling inflation, business investment is going up. So there are some good things that the Conservatives can point to. And of course, as always in politics, a year between this event and potentially the next general election, it's a long time.
Yeah, it certainly isn't. If we think of where we were last year and where we could be a year from now, this is certainly an extremely interesting time in British politics, and great to have you there in Manchester at the Conservative Party conference this morning, and with plenty more to come in our coverage of that event as well on Bloomberg. Caroline, for now, thank you very much. This interesting to reflect on where we are with the British economy. A story on the Bloomberg terminal this morning is that London's stock market is on the cusp of becoming the biggest in Europe again. This was something, of course, we talked about an awful lot of the time when Paris overtook London, partly thanks to a rally in luxury shares as well. And what we're watching now is, because of the resurgence, particularly in energy shares, helped by higher oil prices, of course, we are seeing a bit of a reversal on the that trend. London stock market inching closer to that level that France is at. If we look at the dollar-based market capitalisation, $2.9 trillion for the London market versus 2.93 for the French market. So that is something that we'll be watching closer to the time as well. Well, let's turn to talk from UK politics to US politics next. President Joe Biden urging House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to ensure additional aid money for Ukraine. That's after the stopgap bill passed over the weekend avoided a government shutdown but didn't include extra money for Kyiv. Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank has been following the story for us and joins us now. Derek, first of all, the shutdown has been avoided, but at what political cost are we talking about?
Well, the simple math for Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, through this entire exercise has been that he has had the votes to be able to move forward on a bipartisan government funding bill at roughly existing levels, but that doing so could cost him a chance at keeping his job. Eventually, after exhausting all other opportunities, McCarthy took that. So he put through a stopgap spending bill for a month and a half. It did pass with a healthy bipartisan backing. But here we sit walking into Monday morning, and Matt Gaetz, who bills himself as the Trumpiest member of Congress, is talking about putting a motion to vacate on the floor this week to have the whole House decide whether or not Kevin McCarthy should still be the Speaker of the House. If Gaetz can pull a significant number of his colleagues, and he really only needs somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 to 10 of them to go do it, then McCarthy would have to rely on Democrats to save his job in some form, either voting for him or voting present. And that might extract a cost. Democrats might have a cost to do that because they have so far been very gleefully running against the House and its dysfunctions. And the cost of buying into saving McCarthy's hide here could be substantial for the Speaker.
So that's one of the political ramifications to watch as well. This funding bill that was passed, though, only goes until the 17th of November. Does that set us up for another cliff edge moment?
Well, it does. I mean, that's the fun thing with Washington. If you got bored of the last cliff, just wait a minute. There'll be another one coming up. But this one here, I think, is actually going to be a little bit different for investors. And the reason that I think that it's going to be different for investors is because you have a baseline scenario question. Right? Going into this one, all of the talk was 99% shutdown odds or higher. No one was really thinking. I mean, I know I said on air that there was a chance if McCarthy did this, but I think the preponderant view was that he wouldn't. Now you've got an example in this Congress of McCarthy taking the way out. So what I think is probably going to happen is you're going to have a lot of investors adjusting their baseline scenario back to the idea of this will probably work out somewhere. Let's go with that until proven wrong, rather than where we were, which is this is probably not going to work. Let's just sort of assume it won't work, and we'll all be happily surprised if it does. That's a different baseline scenario. It shows up in different ways in terms of dollar, in terms of treasury, in terms of equity outlooks, all this sort of thing. And candidly, we had been sitting there staring all around the world at a whole bunch of negative headlines. It was nice to get a positive red out there somewhere, right? It's nice to start the week out with a positive sounding red headline on your terminal. There's something to that idea.
Yeah. But briefly, though, the issue of Ukraine now, part of where the conversation is going there. How much support is there in Congress to extend more aid to Ukraine?
Tons. There's tons of support to do something for Ukraine. The problem is, right now, is that it's become more of an issue on the right, especially about funding Ukraine. There are some people who are agitators in the conservative media ecosystem who have raised a lot of skepticism. Donald Trump is raising, some amount of, he's not the most enthusiastic backer of a lot of different things. And so there's this sort of rising restiveness on the right. The way that this gets done is going to be interesting. There's some thought that having one big vote is going to be preferable to having a bunch of smaller votes, which had been kind of the idea before.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.